Hey, before we get on with the main video, I just wanted to note, if anyone has at all been keeping track of the videos coming out and so forth, the fact that every 4 weeks we have our Making a Sequel series, or strictly speaking, just a general non-Chronicles video, because we will be moving on to other kinds of videos in that slot eventually, but either way, it's every 4 weeks, and that should be this week now, and clearly this video isn't that. It was meant to be. I sat down and recorded for like an hour and 40 minutes and did all that, and now just come to edit it. And I find that the video file is a bit shorter than that. It's got like the first 8 minutes and the last 30, but about an hour of raw footage in the middle, gone. Nothing to recover. And so if you just watch the clip, there's just like a sudden glitchiness in the footage, and it say jumps to the final 30 minutes instead. So I'm going to have to re-record all of that, and I will do all of it rather than just a bit missing to keep it all cohesive. So yeah, we're just lucky that I always like to be at least 1 week ahead in terms of videos, just in case something happens. Although when I was thinking about what could happen, I more meant I wouldn't have time to record a new video, so if I had some in a backlog, then that would work. Not we lose the footage to begin with. But anyway, luckily we have this video that you can see now. I'll try to get the Making a Sequel one done for next week now instead. Although, as I said, there's a little bit of a difference in videos like these, the one you're about to watch. You can sit down for about 20 minutes, half an hour, and get that done. The one for that, I'd need to be able to put aside at least 2 hours or something like that, again, just to make sure I have a buffer as well. But either way, it's a bit longer. I'll try to get it out, but we'll see how it goes. Either way, I just wanted to make that clarification here in case anyone was paying attention at all. And regardless, just enjoy this one instead a week earlier than you originally meant to see it. Because of the nature of how I schedule these videos, there have been some cases where I'll mention an idea and say I'll get round to it in a video eventually, but because we're only doing once a week and it's also broken up by some non-Chronicles videos in between, it can actually end up being a while before we finally get to discussing that thing in full detail. And this is one such thing. We're finally getting to explain something that I've mentioned a few times before. This is also an instance where I do wish that I had some kind of graphic designs to put on top of this. Whereas before, obviously, in other main book lore videos of this nature, I don't have stuff to put up either, but this one especially, it would be nice if I had some kind of diagrams of the creatures we're going to be talking about today. So if any of you are artists and feel like coming up with sketches and drawings based upon what we discussed today in this video, that would be much appreciated. But regardless, hello and welcome to the Ragnarok Chronicles. My name is Dominic, and as I say, this is the channel where we usually just discuss the lore of the books that I am writing. So we've done an alien analysis video on the Vavukal before now, and then this time it's going to be pretty much the same format in that we're going to discuss kind of first of all the general anatomy and society, and then to an extent some of the story in which they appear, although not completely for spoiler reasons. But in this case it's going to be in double. Both the Asnenwois and the Polanzias. Again, two races that I keep on going back to the point I have mentioned before, but now finally you'll get to understand them a bit more in detail. To jump right into that then, out at basically the very edges of each universe, rather than being in a part of a galaxy itself, but rather just kind of isolated orphan solar systems, you have one in which there is a planet upon which evolved 3 sapient species: the Asnemwois, the Polanzias, and the Troge. The Troge we'll deal with another time, because they're not present at all in any of the first books, whereas the other 2 races are, so they'll be done another time. Asnemwois, Polanzias, they are the ones that are directly tied into the conflict that's going on throughout the rest of the multiverse. In regards to the Asnemwois physically, if you were to imagine some kind of standard torso, and we would say bipedal in terms of 2 arms and 2 legs. However, whereas we indeed do have your 2 arms coming off from basically shoulders, ending in hands that do indeed also have 5 digits, although they in turn will have claws that, rather than just coming out as nails at the tips, instead are kind of knife-like and come from kind of the central knuckle and actually split the digit in half as they come through, like that. So they have the arms. The legs do not come out from the waist. Instead, the base of the torso rather just kind of rounds off. No, the legs come out of basically where we would think of as our shoulder blades, kind of in the middle of the back, wherein they would then arch upwards first and then come down to the ground, like how cricket legs go up and down, and they then end in what we could equate to hooves, with dark, sharp bristles coming out down the lengths, especially in the lower sections. So their main body is kind of suspended more from the back rather than below. And these are very powerful legs that do allow them to kind of leap across terrain relatively quickly and easily. Although, of course, it depends on the exact surface. As for the head, the Asnemwois are either going to have kind of an extra thick lower jaw or an extra thick upper jaw, and then within that, you either have lots of rows of very sharp teeth or rows instead of just kind of dulled out, very subtle teeth in one either way. Kind of again, in terms of a dichotomy, you're either going to have some that are looking forwards. I forget exactly what that's called scientifically, but like we have the forward-facing eyes, which are often can be described as being kind of fiery, whereas others instead may have more eyes on the side of the heads, as would be more appropriate of like prey animals. For kind of the last physical detail, we can then have horns coming out of the top of the head, which are strictly speaking pushing through the actual shell, which is what they are ultimately all covered in. It's not exposed flesh per se. I guess it's more kind of like a crustacean in that you have kind of a deep crimson, gel plating covering their entire body. At this point, in regards to their society in general, there are some elements we might note, such as the fact that there is a general cultural dislike of mirrors because there's a superstitious belief that the reflection shows one instead their darkest self rather than the true immediate likeness, and they obviously don't wish to be horrified by the realization of what their darkest self really is. But beyond those, the other kind of notable aspects come more or developed more as a response to their interactions with the entities. We've discussed before how the precise nature of each of the universes, in the Alpha realm at least, is determined by a sort of underlying background algorithm which determines what the most likely course of events or outcomes of each decision are and so forth. Well, this universe's algorithm had determined at the point where the entities sought out didn't seek out the Asnenwois themselves, but we'll clarify in a second. In that universe, it had determined that by that point, they had invented these kind of archways, which would allow, like I've mentioned previously in the different kinds of star travel, which, again, so I've gone into more detail there of how they work, but that allow for travel across the multiverse, basically, and the entities wished to claim this technology for themselves. That's why they went to this planet. But in doing so, because this was before the commencement of time, as we understand it in the Alpha realm, all the universes were static at this point, the entities came in and they had to be using hexagon technology, which again, I've talked about before, to allow them to move and survive just within the Alpha realm universe. But in doing so, this also ended up bringing in some of the Asnemwois into the hexagon's field as well. Thus, they became the first creatures native to the Alpha realm to actually move and exist in that kind of mobility. Taking advantage of this fact, the entities then presented themselves actively as gods. As has been discussed, they kind of do previously. Again, all of these videos that I mentioned are going to be the iCard and in the description below. They presented themselves as gods and basically persuaded the Asnemwois to blindly follow them and allow them to take their technology, the archways. At some point after the entities had left, however, well, first of all, when they left some of their technology behind. Just they didn't care about it, whatever. They were that confident and they don't need to make sure they keep a hold of everything. They can always make more. In doing so, they left behind some active hexagons, which allowed for some of the Asnemwois to remain conscious and mobile as well. And over time, they then realised that they had been tricked, basically, by the entities, and they wanted retribution for this fact. So using what kind of traces of entity technology have been left behind to understand their enemies' capacities and capabilities, along with their own technology that the universe determined they would have invented by this point, and replicating hexagons and so forth. They essentially built themselves an armada and followed the entities back out into the outer region and forced them out of their home, the Cortex. At which point we then catch up with the history that I covered in Who the Gods Met, where they were spending some time in exile in the Andromeda Galaxy. So this is filling in that gap of history that I omitted there, because I wanted to wait before we were talking about the Asnemwois in general before discussing it. They are subsequently followed, again after the events that were covered in Who the Gods Met, that the entities came, or some of the entities came back and got rid of the Asnemwois there again and kind of went backwards and forwards. There's more history that I could talk about with the Asnemwois specifically in terms of the Crusade and where they went after that point. Let's just say they returned to their homeworld at least for a time before moving on yet again to try to restart anew. Also, as part of that, seeking out a creature called the Tentortex, which again, mentioned before, this kind of being that is tied into the loop of time or universes in the Alpha Realm that allows the end of the Alpha Realm timeline to then come back around to start at the beginning again. They've learnt about this creature during their time in the Cortex while they've been occupying it, and now they're saying if anything is going to be as a god, the Tentortex would be that idol that they would now go to. And as such, we now end up with a specific faction of the Asnemwois being the disciple state Asnemwois, who are specifically, well, all of the Asnemwois pretty much are, to some degree or another, embedded in a religious side of their culture. As I say, the other kind of notable parts of their culture are more of a consequence of the entities, but the disciple state ones are the ones that are really dedicating their lives to this faith in the Tentortex and all of that side of things. But even in kind of more trickle-down states, you have certain jobs could be defined as divine or indivine, wherein those divine equivalents of the jobs are the ones that are respected higher, whereas the indivine equivalents, even though they're essentially doing the same work, they are treated as kind of lesser workers, because the reason they're indivine is because they aren't as in touch, they aren't as dedicated to the faith. At which point we might now come to the other race that I was just going to discuss today, that being the Polanzias, who are, say, the cousins of the Asnemwois on their homeworld. Now these ones are slightly more insectoid in how we would view them anyway. In the books, I kind of describe the average Polanthian height as being about equivalent to the character Tony, who, while I don't give a canon height for in turn, is a 15-year-old British boy, so if you look at statistics for that, it's probably about the height you're going to get from most adult Polanthias. But you get some extremes in either case, as you would with any species. And what happened there is once they kind of too had been awakened by the subsequent experiments and operations of the Asnemwois, where they were building out on the entity technology that had been left behind, the Polanthias woken up as well. Especially then, once the Asnemwois had left their homeworld to go up against the entities, the Polanthias saw it as their need to go after them, to stop them from doing something that will be massively regrettable. Because, however, by kind of the determination of the universe and the states of their different species, they weren't as immediately technologically on the same level as the Asnemwois, they needed to catch up quickly. And that results in basically every Polanthia at this point having cybernetic augmentations into their, say, their exoskeleton. The typical ones that they'll all have is, naturally, the Polanthias have two pincer-like fingers, but then they'll have an artificial thumb also added in there, which can itself open up and have other functions as well. But then others say any odd augmentations, adaptations, mechanical implants could be put across their bodies to allow them to better interface with their technology and just try to advance as much as possible, as quickly as possible, get as in tune with the technology as possible. They also made use of the Ermics, which I don't think I named itself in the different types of star travel video, but it's the subspace conduits that they're using there, which again was developed using remnants of entity technology. As I described how that was implemented, I'm almost certain I did back then, and they used that to basically very quickly traverse the universe, because they didn't know actually which way the Asnemwois had gone, and they didn't realise they'd actually left for the outer region. So the Polanzias end up going around the universe, and in the process, their mindset of making sure the Asnemwois do no harm kind of developed into more of a general unilateral policing and justice system, wherein they would go around making sure that no one was doing wrong, at least by their standards. This they would continue to do, indeed interacting with the entities while they were in their exile, and going around until a large number of them end up coming to get involved with the incident surrounding the Ark. Well, the Ark of Angels, that is. That being the subject of the second book of the Ragnarok Chronicles actual canon franchise series, 2016 series, whatever, as is out now, as always has been. If you've been watching these previous videos, yes, I'm going to promote it again. The whole point of this channel is it's about the books themselves. If you haven't already, you can get that book and its predecessor, Gift of the Mansin, on paperback and ebook now, or both if you really want, from Amazon. So once again, links in the description below. And also later in this year, soon, we're going to be getting book 3 coming out, Celestial Coup, and then for a few months after that, we'll be getting book 4, completing this first tetralogy set in 2016. For the most part, as I said, I've mentioned before, there's a bit of time travel in Ark of Angels, but complete that set ahead of those new books. You can make sure you've read the first 2 now, and also that might give you an appreciation of these videos. I don't know, obviously these videos are more often than not meant to be talking about more the broader stuff of the series, not necessarily the books that are out right now, but still there's mentions there. There's a spoiler video for what people's plots were for the Ark itself that was released a couple of weeks ago. You'll be able to watch that once you read the book. Whatever, I can't stop you doing whatever you want. Either way, just hopefully you have found this interesting, just kind of a very, well, I say very brief, I don't know how long this has been going, but a quick, more introduction and explainer of a couple of races that I have mentioned in previous videos already, to give you hopefully a better, at least kind of general perception of the kind of things that they are. And as I say, if you go through more videos or as you go through the books themselves, that will then give you more personable interactions with individuals of these species, or the species in general. You get even more fleshed out and developed appreciation for what these important beings are, because they each respectively will go on to continue to play important parts in the history of the multiverse and the conflict that is now gripping it and risking its future. I think the point I was just trying to make is, the usual outro. Thank you for watching. You can always check back on other videos on the channel if you want as well. Hang around to see the next ones that we have coming out in turn. And either way, until next time I see you, just remember to keep on telling stories.